While lawmakers managed to push through a blueprint for state spending in the final days of the legislative session, they had to resort to some questionable tactics to do so. Facing a stalemate over how to raise the revenue needed to fill the state's budget hole, legislators relied on what even some supporters admitted were creative interpretations of Oklahoma's Constitution.
When the 2017 legislative session began its final week on Monday without an agreement on major revenue-raising measures, most observers predicted a special session would be necessary. That's because Article 5, Section 33 of Oklahoma State Constitution says no revenue bill shall be passed during the 5 last days of the session. In addition, State Question 640 added language to the Constitution which says a revenue-raising bill can become law without a vote of the people only if it receives the approval of 3/4 of the membership of the House and Senate. Yet House and Senate Republicans in recent days passed a number of bills which Democrats argue violate those prohibitions. One such measure, House Bill 2403, which caps itemized deductions on state tax returns. Democratic State Representative Jason Dunnington questioned whether passing that bill in the final week of the session, and without a supermajority of 76 votes, would hold up to a court challenge.
Would it not be in our best interest, because of the threat of a lawsuit which could take this money out of our budget, over $100 million out of our budget, if we were to lose, would it not be better for us to pause on this, wait for the governor to call for a concurrent special, pass this in that, therefore not jeopardizing what will be a very important piece of the budget?
Representative Kyle Hilbert dismissed those concerns, arguing the law was on their side.
Because we're not raising a tax, we're getting rid of a deduction. We've done that historically with 51 votes, not with 76. And since it is held up in court, different measures we've done with 51 votes, I believe this would hold up as well. And if it didn't, then we get to see each other again in special session.
Within hours after the bill passed, the Oklahoma Council of Public Affairs released a statement saying House Bill 2403 is an unconstitutional tax hike on working Oklahoma families and senior citizens. Should House Bill 2403 become law, we intend to challenge its constitutionality at the Oklahoma Supreme Court as a violation of State Question 640. Another measure, House Bill 2429, raises the gross production tax rate on wells drilled before 2015 from 1% to 4%. That bill is expected to add about $95 million to next year's budget, leading House Democrats to once again question whether Republicans were introducing revenue-raising bills during the session's final week.
We've heard time and time again that this is going to raise revenue. And it doesn't take a legal scholar to figure out that this is a revenue bill.
As we all know, the Oklahoma Constitution prohibits revenue-raising measures in the last 5 days of session. You can call it what you want. If it walks like a duck, talks like a duck, it's a duck. And this is a revenue-raising measure.
So I understand the verbal gymnastics that you've got to play to try to get around the Constitution, but at the end of the day, you know as well as I do, don't you, Representative Wallace, that the real main reason that you're running this, the only reason you're running it at this rate, the only reason you're going back on your word for those 1% wells is to raise revenue.
Representative Kevin Wallace disagreed, maintaining the bill simply adjusts an incentive.
This is a modification of the incentive that was given. It is a good piece of policy. It's reforming, and it's balancing what we need to take care of.
Wallace also argued the bill does not need 76 votes to pass because it doesn't raise taxes.
Let's get one thing straight. The GPT tax in the state of Oklahoma is 7%, period. It has been discussed in the fact that this is a 51 measure because this was an incentive. It was given as a rebate. We have voted last week actually, to do away with rebates, $46 million out of oil and gas. As I hear about wanting to increase what big oil and gas pays, here is your opportunity.
At a news conference to question the constitutionality of several of the measures, House Minority Leader Scott Inman predicted the bills would end up blowing a major hole in the state budget.
Our fear is that if the Supreme Court strikes them down as unconstitutional and we don't get back in time to correct the measure rapidly, then what could happen is the equivalent of a revenue failure that you saw that President Dorflinger had to come in and cut immediately budgets by 2%, 4%, 5%.
Fears of a revenue shortfall were also raised by Senate Minority Leader John Sparks in debate over a fee of $1.50 a pack to be imposed on cigarettes, a measure introduced after earlier efforts for a cigarette tax hike failed. Sparks called the bill fatally flawed and predicted it would lead to a financial train wreck for the state.
When this fails in the courts, we will be in trouble. And some might say, well, it might not fail. I'm not sure that this is what we want to roll the dice on.
But Senate Floor Leader Greg Treat argued that calling it a fee rather than a tax is more than just semantics, since the measure has a specific purpose.
Is the court going to uphold it? I think there's a solid argument to make that there's a policy. There's enough policy in here that the intent of this bill is to stop people from smoking.
Oklahoma Policy Institute Executive Director David Blatt thinks that could be a tough sell.
The court is going to know that they were looking at cigarette tax increases. All this language about smoking cessation was not part of any other bill, was not part of any bill this session.
And Blatt believes banking on the revenue from the cigarette fee and other measures introduced in the last week puts the state on a dangerous path.
There is no question that if the courts rule against that bill or the exemption bills, they're going to have to come back in special session and figure out some way to fill what would be a very large, gaping and dangerous hole.